guys, it's Emma Vigling with TYT Politics. Hope you're having a great day. We're trying something new with the stream, so this may be extremely high quality. I'm pretty pumped about it. I hope everyone's having a great day, but it's kind of some breaking news. We knew this was coming. Scott Pruitt, the emails were released by a judge that were requested by a liberal activist group, and it shows some pay-to-play corruption. You would be shocked that this EPA stooge actually coordinates with oil companies even more so than we had previously thought. Gasp. I know, I can barely believe it. So, as you know, Scott Pruitt was confirmed as EPA administrator on Friday. He faced some pretty staunch opposition. There were even reports that EPA officials were writing letters to their GOP senators urging them not to confirm Scott Pruitt. The Republicans did so anyway, with the exception of Susan Collins, who has stood out from her colleagues, her Republican colleagues. She also voted against Betsy DeVos. So, lots going on there. But again, Scott Pruitt, he's going to be our EPA administrator, the head of the EPA. There's not really much we can do about it. But Democrats were urging for the confirmation vote to take place after these emails were released. The Republicans, since they have all the power, pushed it through anyway. But the emails still have been released, so we get to look at them and then just get even more depressed. Yippity-ki-yo-yay. That's not how you say it, but whatever. By the way, the EPA officials are still not happy with him. I actually watched Scott Pruitt's speech where he basically talked about how he's going to really listen and he's going to take into consideration the beliefs of the anti-oil crowd and the environmental protection people, but the EPA officials are not buying it because Scott Pruitt has sued the EPA 14 times, I kid you not. This was in a quote from an anonymous EPA staffer. Pruitt's talk was as bad as expected, said a current EPA staffer of over 20 years who requested anonymity following the speech. Not one word about public health, and talking about the rule of law as if we don't do everything with the realization that it will end up in court. It was condescending and it was hypocritical, especially given the fact that he has, yes, again, I will repeat, sued the EPA 14 times. That's a lot of times. So he clearly doesn't hate the EPA. It goes with the theme of Trump officials. He's just appointing people who want to do away with the administrations that they are appointed to be the head of. So the Democrats were, again, wanting to wait for these emails to be released by the time, but from his time as an Oklahoma Attorney General, but that didn't happen. So an Oklahoma judge ordered the release of the emails in response to a lawsuit by the Center for Media and Democracy, a liberal watchdog group. Many of the emails are copies of documents previously provided in 2014 to the New York Times, which examined Mr. Pruitt's interaction with energy industry players that his offices also help regulate. I have reported on that in the past. Those emails show the 3-page letter, most erroneously, written by Devon Energy, one of Oklahoma's biggest oil and gas companies, and the Attorney General's staff, Scott Pruitt's staff, had taken Devon Energy's draft, copied it onto state government stationery with barely any words changed, sent it to Washington to be reviewed by the Obama administration's EPA with the Attorney General's signature. Like, as corrupt as it gets, just copy and paste. And we've seen that on the federal level as well, not just with state attorney generals, lawmakers copying often conservative groups as pieces of legislation and just putting them through our government. So that's corruption for you. So this is the kind of guy Scott Pruitt is, corrupt to the bone. More of these emails have been released, and I want to just give you the lowdown on what some of them said. So this is one. So these are from the New York Times. This is some of the stuff that they reported on. The companies, the oil and gas companies, provided him draft letters to send to federal regulators in an attempt to block federal regulations intended to regulate greenhouse gas emissions from oil and gas wells, ozone air pollution, and chemicals used in fracking, the email correspondences show. They held secret meetings to discuss more comprehensive ways to combat the Obama administration's environmental agenda, and the companies and organizations they funded repeatedly praised Mr. Pruitt and his staff for the assistance he provided during their campaign. Here is a quote from one of these emails. please find attached a short white paper with some talking points that you might find useful to cut and paste when encouraging states to file comments on the SSM rule, wrote Roderick Hasty, a lobbyist at Hunton and Williams, a law firm that represents major utilities, including Southern Company, urging Mr. Pruitt's office to file comments on the proposed EPA rule related to so-called startup shutdown and malfunction emissions. That's incredibly erroneous. Why is a private law firm sending a government official talking points is really beyond me, but, that's kind of how it goes when you're that corrupt. Another thing that happened. In a March 2013 letter to Mr. Pruitt's office, William Whitsitt, then an executive vice president of Devon, referred to a letter his company had drafted for Mr. Pruitt to deliver on Oklahoma State stationery to the Obama administration officials, which I referenced before. Mr. Pruitt, meeting with the White House officials, made the case that the rule, which would rein in the planet-warming methane emissions, would be harmful to the state's economy. His argument was taken directly from Mr. Whitsitt's draft language. That's another thing that came up. And the New York Times puts this caveat in. The emails do not appear to include any request for his intervention explicitly in exchange for campaign contributions, although Mr. Pruitt was working as a member of the Republican Attorneys General's Association to raise money for many of the same companies. Also, these emails show ties to the Koch brothers. So the Koch brothers are notoriously not big fans of Donald Trump because he's not a puppet for them like, say, Rubio or Scott Walker. But many of the people in his cabinet, including his vice president and now Scott Pruitt, are deeply tied to the Koch brothers and are the puppets of the Koch brothers. So it's not really that nerve-wracking for them. They're going to be okay. This was also from the New York Times article. Thank you to your respective bosses and all they are doing to push back against President Obama's EPA and its axis with liberal environmental groups to increase energy costs for Oklahomans and American families across the state, said one email sent to Mr. Pruitt and an Oklahoma congressman in August 2013 by Matt Ball, an executive at Americans for Prosperity. That nonprofit group is funded in part by the Kochs, the Kansas business executives who spent much of the last decade combating federal regulations, particularly in the energy sector. You both work for true champions of freedom and liberty, the note said. I think freedom and liberty is French for oil profits and my jacuzzi in my backyard. That's what they work for, I would assume. So again, the Koch brothers love Scott Pruitt. The Republican State Leadership Committee, to which the Koch Industries has donated nearly $1.3 million in the last decade. That's a lot in Oklahoma. For a state, that's a lot, a smaller state. Spent $150,000 supporting Pruitt in the 2010 race, that Republican State Leadership Committee. In 2014, Freedom Partners gave $175,000 to the political nonprofit that Pruitt directed. The idea that it's a nonprofit doing charitable things is, of course, ridiculous. So I'm pretty sure the Kochs are doing just fine under Trump. And that's really the overview of what the New York Times article released. Again, it doesn't show anything new that we didn't know about Scott Pruitt. And that's the thing about it that bugs me, is because those emails released in 2014, if the Republicans weren't extremely corrupt, with the exception of Susan Collins, good on her for voting against Scott Pruitt, but if they weren't to the bone corrupt, like literally don't care about copy and pasting emails from oil companies into government discussions and potential legislation, they don't care about that at all. If they weren't corrupt to the bone, then they would have voted down this nominee. The bar is so low for them, I wouldn't care if the I would care, but at least it would be consistent if they were like, we want a climate change denier, but we can't have a climate change denier who literally is so lazy and stupid that he copy and pastes a letter from an oil company with barely changing any letters, so much so that people know this and they're like, this doesn't really make sense in this current tense, so this must have been copy and pasted from somewhere else. That came out in 2014, 3 years ago. At least have some integrity and say, you know what, we'll vote for a guy who isn't thoroughly corrupt, who still shares our insane and factually baseless views. But no, They don't care. They're just going to put in a guy who is an exact stooge of an industry. And why is it, and this is kind of me spitballing here, why is it that when you're talking to a foreign government and getting talking points from them, like Michael Flynn, and I'm not excusing what he did because it's pretty much treasonous, and negotiating with them before, while you're still a private citizen, which is against the law, and taking their belief systems and putting them into American legislation, like Russian beliefs and putting them into American legislation and governance. Why is that so erroneous? But taking the preferences and the talking points of a private oil company that is multinational, it's not just confined to the United States, and putting them into legislation is just another walk in the park. So taking the interests of a nation state and putting them into legislation, you're fired, you're blackballed, that's almost treason. Taking the interests of a private company and putting them into legislation, hey, just another Tuesday in Washington. Not saying they're the same, but there's hypocrisy there. And the Republicans are experts in hypocrisy. In fact, they wrote the book. It's a bestseller for assholes. So, all right, guys. Have a great day, and I hope that this new streaming method worked out. It's pretty nice here. So, have a great day, my friends. Mwah.